Welcome back to Tales of Kind Souls, where we bring you stories that touch the heart, inspire hope, and remind us of the power of kindness in the most unexpected places. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and join our growing family of listeners who believe in the goodness of humanity. Today's story is one that begins on an ordinary flight, but takes a turn that no one on board will ever forget. It's about a young woman who was quietly sleeping in row 22, unaware that her life was about to change because of an unexpected announcement from the pilot. Let's begin. The cabin lights were dimmed as the plane cruised steadily at 35,000 feet. It was one of those late-night flights when the world outside is pitch black, and the passengers inside are wrapped in their own thoughts, distractions, or much-needed sleep. In row 22, by the window, sat a young woman named Emily. She had boarded the plane looking exhausted, her small backpack tucked carefully under the seat in front of her. She had closed her eyes almost immediately after takeoff, drifting into a light but peaceful sleep. Emily had been through a difficult few weeks. She was flying back home after spending time caring for her grandmother, who had been ill in another state. Between hospital visits, sleepless nights, and the emotional toll of watching someone she loved suffer, Emily's energy had been drained. This flight was her only chance to rest before she had to return to her job and the demands of everyday life. The flight attendants moved quietly through the aisles, checking on passengers and offering water to those who were awake. Most people were either watching movies with their headphones on or dozing in their seats. Everything was calm. Then the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," came the voice, steady but with an edge that caught people's attention. "If there is a doctor on board, or anyone with medical training, could you please make yourself known to the cabin crew immediately?" The words seemed to ripple through the cabin like a sudden chill. People shifted in their seats, glanced around, and whispered to one another. Something was wrong. Emily stirred in her sleep, faintly aware of the announcement, but she wasn't fully awake yet. She shifted against the window, trying to sink deeper into the comfort of her rest. Meanwhile, in the front rows of the plane, a commotion had begun. A man in his 60s had collapsed, clutching his chest. His wife was frantically trying to wake him, her voice trembling as she called for help. Flight attendants rushed to their side, carrying the emergency medical kit and oxygen tank. "Please, is anyone here a doctor?" one of the attendants asked urgently, scanning the rows. Passengers looked around anxiously. A few shook their heads. No one stood up. The tension grew thicker by the second. The man's breathing was shallow, his face pale. His wife was crying, holding his hand tightly, whispering his name. And that's when Emily, still half asleep in row 22, finally opened her eyes fully. She blinked, trying to understand the nervous energy in the cabin. She caught sight of a flight attendant rushing past her row, speaking into a walkie-talkie. Something in her heart pulled her awake instantly. Emily was not just an ordinary passenger. She was a nurse. She had been working in the emergency department of her local hospital for 3 years. It was a demanding job, one that had given her experience in handling crises under pressure. She hadn't planned to reveal that about herself on this flight. She had wanted nothing more than to rest, to have just a few hours where she wasn't needed by anyone. But now, as she sat up straighter, listening to the captain's words, repeating over the intercom, she knew she couldn't stay seated. Taking a deep breath, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "I'm a nurse," she said, her voice firm but calm, catching the attention of a flight attendant who was hurrying past. "Take me to him." The relief on the attendant's face was immediate. "Thank you. Please follow me," she said, guiding Emily toward the front of the plane. Passengers turned their heads to watch as Emily moved quickly down the aisle. Some whispered prayers, others simply looked on with hope in their eyes. When Emily reached the man, she dropped to her knees beside him. His pulse was weak and his breathing was irregular. She quickly checked his airway, assessed his vitals, and asked the attendants to prepare the oxygen. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice steady but kind. The man didn't respond. His wife was sobbing quietly, clutching his arm. Emily placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm going to do everything I can. You're not alone," she instructed the attendants clearly, guiding them with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before. "I need the defibrillator ready. Keep the oxygen flowing. And please, clear some space around us." The flight attendants obeyed quickly, and even some passengers nearby offered to move or help however they could. The energy in the cabin shifted from fear to a fragile thread of hope. For the next 20 minutes, Emily worked tirelessly. She administered CPR when the man's heart rhythm faltered, encouraged him when he briefly regained consciousness, and never let go of the calm determination in her voice. At one point, the captain even came out of the cockpit, checking on the situation. "We're preparing for an emergency landing if necessary," he told Emily. She nodded, her forehead damp with sweat. "Do it. He needs a hospital as soon as possible. But we'll keep him stable until then." Through it all, Emily's focus never wavered. She thought about her grandmother, about all the patients she had seen in critical condition, and about why she had chosen this profession in the first place. It wasn't about recognition or thanks. It was about being there when someone's life was hanging in the balance. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was only a short while, the man's breathing stabilized. His pulse grew stronger. His color began to return, little by little. Emily allowed herself the smallest sigh of relief. She stayed by his side, monitoring him closely, until the plane made an emergency landing at the nearest airport, where paramedics rushed aboard to take over. As the man was carefully carried off the plane, his wife reached out and grabbed Emily's hand. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "You saved him. I don't know how to thank you." Emily squeezed her hand gently. "Just be there for him. That's what matters." When Emily finally returned to her seat in row 22, the passengers around her broke into quiet applause. Some smiled at her with gratitude, others simply nodded in respect. She felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't crave the attention. She only wanted to rest, knowing she had done what she could. She leaned back against the seat, closed her eyes, and whispered a silent prayer for the man she had just helped. What she didn't realize was how deeply her actions had touched everyone on board. For the rest of the flight, passengers spoke to each other with softer voices, shared their snacks with strangers, and offered words of kindness to the crew. It was as if her selfless act had reminded them all of the humanity they carried within themselves. Later, when the plane finally landed at its intended destination, many passengers stopped by row 22 to thank her before leaving. Some offered hugs, others words of admiration, and though Emily smiled politely and accepted their gratitude, in her heart she thought of it simply as doing what anyone should do when faced with someone in need, because kindness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wakes you up in row 22 when the pilot asks if there's a doctor on board, and sometimes kindness is just about saying yes, even when you're tired, even when no one would blame you for staying seated. Emily went home that night exhausted, but with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew her journey as a nurse would always be demanding, but it would also always be meaningful, and for everyone on that flight, her courage became a story they would never forget. A reminder that there are still kind souls among us, ready to step forward when it matters most. Thank you for listening to this story on Tales of Kind Souls. If it touched your heart, please share it with someone who could use a reminder of the quiet heroes walking among us every day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us again for more stories that celebrate the best of humanity. Until next time, may kindness always guide your way.